session is teaching business statistics and analytics using R. And Leslie Hendrix from the University of South Carolina, who is also one of our newest authors on modern business analytics, along with Matt Taddy and Matt Harding, which will be coming soon. It's publishing in January. But today, Leslie's going to cover how she teaches statistics and analytics using R and her approach at the University of South Carolina.
So I'm Leslie Hendrix, and I am a clinical associate professor in the Management Science Department in the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching R to business students, why we do it at the University of South Carolina and in the business school, and how we accomplish that. So I find that a lot of instructors might be thinking about teaching a little bit of coding in their class, and they're just kind of lost for where to start, since it's so different from traditional methods, maybe using Excel. So a little background. So the business students in the Darla Moore School of Business, our undergraduates, take 2 statistics courses. And when I came on board I'm a pure statistician, so my degree is in statistics. I came to the business school as part of the push for analytics that was happening with our dean, Dean Bruce. And so when I came on board in the fall of 2017, it was our first rollout of a 2-course sequence. So we used to teach just 1 statistics course to our undergraduate majors, and this is for all majors. This is for every undergrad in the business school, and now we have 2. So I was hired to coordinate the 2nd course. So the first course is a regular, intro to statistics, a first course in business statistics. And it's taught in our statistics department, which is not in the business school, kind of a different setup. And then our 2nd course is the one that I teach and coordinate. And this one covers advanced topics like, multiple regression and logistic regression, ANOVA, and time series, and a couple of other topics. And so when I first started, I was handed the developed course. So, but they had always used Excel. And so they kind of just made it work with both courses with Excel. But I, coming from a pure statistics background, felt like I was working with one hand tied behind my back, especially when I got to multiple regression. And those of you who use Excel for multiple regression know that it's kind of a pain, and you can't really dial up residual analysis like I could in something more powerful like R or Python. So I piloted teaching R in the spring semester, that very next semester, into my 2 sections. And I did a little research into whether to use R or whether to use something different, because for me, coming from a statistics department, teaching R seemed very obvious, but I didn't want to give the business students some skill that they didn't need. So I did a lot of research before I chose this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I piloted it that next spring. And once the students got over the hurdle of learning the basics of coding, they had a much more solid grasp of the topics that were taught. I found that we weren't wasting so much time trying to find a workaround in Excel to do these high-powered analyses, and we could focus on the actual statistical concept. And so the students, of course, we need to know how they feel about it. They actually liked learning R, according to the student evaluations, about 5 to 1. Now, I should be honest, if you're thinking about rolling out R and it hasn't been taught in your business school, that was a really strong dichotomy. The ones who liked it really, really liked having that skill, and the ones who didn't were typically those with friends in other sections, and they didn't want to have to learn something new or something that they thought was harder, and they were pretty strongly against it. But we knew why they were against it, and so that wasn't a really valid reason for not teaching it. And so my department chair looked at the student evaluations, and then he talked to the dean, Dean Bruce, and it became required as of the next fall semester. So I wasn't even in the loop for that conversation. They just rolled it out to the whole business school based on the evaluations from my course. So that was quite a Herculean undertaking. All right, so what some of the comments that we got from students on the student evaluations, I just have a couple quotes here. I wish I could have learned more about R. When I took this class, I was one of the lucky students to learn how to code in R. I feel that we didn't have much time to develop this amazing skill in class. And that's true. The first semester that I rolled it out, I was just teaching them just enough as we went through examples to be able to incorporate R. Now we do something a little different, which I'll talk about in just a moment. It helped with the career fair to differentiate me from other people. So we have a career fair every year. They get to meet with prospective employers. And so also I would love to take more data science courses, and I hope they are offered. And another thing that we're noticing, this student was able to enunciate it, even though sometimes I'm not using R directly, the coding language was a good way to understand other coding like SQL, for example. And in case you're thinking about teaching something like R or Python, incorporating that into your curriculum or just your class, we are finding that students are coming back to me quite often and saying, you know, I put that I knew R on the resume and literally that's why I got the job. So they're finding that maybe this business doesn't have like a whole analytics section yet, but they're looking to start one, and then they don't even have it on the job announcement that they're looking for R or Python, but they were already thinking about it. And so it puts our students often at the top of the stack. Just anecdotal evidence just from when students come talk to me about it afterwards. But my department chair last week also told me about an alumni that said, did you know that they're teaching R at the business school now? So obviously he knew, but he said that's so important. This was like a 30-year alumni. And so it's becoming very, very popular. The banter is very good that we have incorporated R. At first, when I incorporated it, I thought, what have I done? But now we've got some good methods in place, and I'd like to share those with you for how we teach R. So a little bit about how I decided that it was okay to propose to my department chair that we teach R. You know, instead of just using Excel or getting some software like Minitab. I researched a lot about like what other business schools were doing, okay, and talked to a lot of people before I decided to do it, talked to employers, things like that. And just to kind of show you how important it is, how in demand of a skill it is, this morning I went ahead in preparation for this little chat today with you, and I just typed in R and Python into the Indeed search bar, and it came up with 26,061 jobs. So that was just this morning. And then I thought, why don't I check to see how many of them pay like a pretty good starting salary? So 70,000 and up. I filtered it on that, and it came up with 19,317 jobs. And I of course put it in the United States. We could have gone global, but I put it in the US. And then I went ahead and said, I wonder if our entry-level students can get a $70,000 plus job. So I also filtered it on that, and there are over 2,000 jobs for entry-level R and Python making $70,000 or more. Now, I didn't read the job descriptions, but as you can see, I'm sure some of them might not fit for our entry-level students, but obviously some of them are going to fit. And this is what I find no matter where I look, okay? Now, the reason I put in R or Python is because if you're gonna just have the goal of teaching some coding, some scripting language in your class or your curriculum, I think either one of them are a good way to go right now. R was created for statistics, and it's got a whole ecosystem of packages that you can bring in that contain data sets, that contain other functions for carrying out not just statistical analysis, but all kinds of analysis. In fact, we used R for the textbook that's coming out, the Modern Business Analytics text that's coming out in the spring for machine learning, and even for the whole entire book. Okay, even for text analysis, where it might be, that one might be a little bit easier in Python, but we still were able to do enough for our book with R. So it really can do mostly everything. Python is more of a general purpose programming language. So maybe if you're in computer science, you might like Python better. But we think either one would do a good job at giving your students that important skill of being able to not be afraid of just having a cursor. Okay. So Matt Taddy, who's the main author, the first author on the text, I went ahead and asked him, and he said, business levels at all levels at Amazon will be much more insightful and productive if they know how to learn, pull, manipulate, and analyze data using scripting languages. Anyone working with data will need to continue learning and updating their computational and methodological skills. So he's, by the way, he's the chief economist for North America, the consumer division at Amazon. So he should know. All right. Okay. So that's kind of the why behind it. So it was at first because I needed some other tool to be able to help my students learn these concepts. And then it became kind of a higher, a kind of bigger concept, something bigger to be able to give our students, to be able to give them something on their resume, which can actually put them at the top of the stack. All right. So how do we teach R to the students? So I'm sure if you have been teaching business stats in Excel, you might wonder, where would I even start, right? So the most important point is to just get started. So that's what I did. So based upon a couple years of teaching it to all of our students, I've got a fairly good workflow now. So instead of waiting to introduce R when we have our first example, after we teach kind of the background information and definitions and things like that, I now teach R in the very first lecture. And a little more than half of our students have a Mac. I'm not sure what your student mix is, but it's a very popular machine. And so it's almost 50-50, but this semester I've seen every semester it increases a little, and it's shifting away from that. There are definitely more students that have a Mac now to use. R works on either one, but you'll notice that I have a Windows machine open on this table, and I also have a Mac laying here. So if you're lucky enough, it's nice if you have access to both computers, if you're in charge of creating content for your students, just so if anything ever looks a little bit different from one operating system to the next, you have that. But if you don't worry about it, because I taught for many years with just the Windows, and I would just have my students send me screenshots or whatever if I needed them for the Mac. So that's not imperative. Either one is going to work just fine. So we incorporate R into all the lecture slides, videos. We demonstrate R in almost every single class. And I will literally take my slides down and go over to R and demonstrate so that they can key in those commands and execute them at the same time as me. So I think learning to code is like learning to play a sport or learning to swim. You can't watch someone else do it. You need to actually do it too, and you need to practice it. So hands-on is key. We encourage our students to bring a laptop to class. Almost every single student has a laptop that comes to our class, and we always have a couple. I teach 360 myself this semester. So there are usually one or two that have a Chromebook, and you can even get R installed on there, but it's not optimal. Their operating systems aren't very powerful, but we make that work too. So we have 3 case studies and 3 projects where the students use R, and we encourage Googling if they want to do something fancy and extra. Again, just like Matt Taddy said, and it's one of my mantras too, we always want to be, lifelong learners. We realize that you need to constantly be evolving with this type of technology. So issues that you might encounter. I found that students need a lot of support outside of class. They really struggle with going from the interface of Excel, where it's kind of like you can manipulate the data right there in real time and it's menu driven, versus R, where you just get a cursor. So I don't know if you know what, well, I only shared PowerPoint, so I won't switch over to R, but with R, you get a bunch of information about what version you have when you open it, and then you literally just get a command prompt with a flashing cursor to type something in. So my students have a little bit of a hard time wrapping their mind around how to interact with data in this very different way, where they kind of store it out of sight and use functions to look at it, like the structure function or the head function. So they need some support there when they start. And I also I take about the first week and a half to just dedicated to R, so they can learn how to, calculate a mean when there's an NA, a missing value in the data, calculate a mean on a subset of the original data, calculate a mean on a subset based on two different variables from the original data. So I kind of clear my calendar for that first week and a half, because I find that it's a lot less frustrating if I'm sort of kind of available on demand. So I make sure that I'm around a lot for office hours, and that I'm answering my messages back to them quite frequently during that first week and a half. So the proper
Hey,
amount.
Leslie,
Yeah.
one of the attendees asked, do you ask students to start from RStudio or Online Notebook?
Yeah, so I'm actually teaching base R. That's a good question. And the reason that we picked base R is because, RStudio, they have a free version, but it's not guaranteed to be free forever. And I figured that anything I taught in base R could translate to RStudio, but not vice versa, like calling in data sets. They can use the menu-driven option in RStudio, and you can't in base R. So anyway, RStudio is absolutely fine, but I already have all my materials made on base R, and so that's what I use. Does that answer the question?
I believe it does.
Okay. All right. So I also, we got pushed into having larger class sizes, and so I kind of lobbied to get a little extra help for the instructors, because right now we have three main instructors for 291 that teach a very large number of students every semester. Like right now, as I mentioned before, I have 360 students myself. So a very large number of students. And so we were able to get MBAs to help. And this picture is kind of funny. This was when we first had MBAs to help and we didn't have a dedicated space. So we were reserving classrooms. And this is one day they got actually kicked out of the classroom. Somebody else said they had reserved it. And they're just MBA students, so they certainly weren't going to argue with a faculty member. And they improvised and came out in the hall. So I just kind of thought I'd share our growing pains with y'all out there. So we didn't have any dedicated space then. But again, my dean is very committed to this analytics part of the curriculum, and he carved out some space for us, which we are very fortunate to have. This picture is when our data lab walls were just put up. We created it out of an old lobby. You can see the tape still on the glass panels there. So in the fall of 2019, we got our space, and it's staffed mostly by MBA students and a few undergrads. And I work with them to teach them R and teach them the course content. And we have a data lab lead that is sort of the liaison between the data lab staff and me now. So we're getting a good workflow down for that. So our undergrads can go into our data lab and get help anytime they're open with course content for Management Science 291. And we even bring in computer science undergrads. And we find that a freshman or a sophomore over in computer science is enough to get us unstuck when we're having an issue with someone's operating system. So that's a real luxury. So this is the main part of our data lab space. You can see it overlooks our Carolina Coliseum. And we've got a big table in the middle. The head of the data lab was really big on not having chairs in there. He didn't want people hanging out in there. He wants them to go across the hall in our satellite space when they're working out problems, and then they're supposed to come back to the actual data lab when they have their questions. All right, so this is just a picture 2 years ago of the data lab staff. I'm in there and Sunny's in there. We direct to the data lab. And then these were our students at the time. We don't have a group picture since COVID hit, but I thought I'd share the old one. It's always a fun group that we get in there to do this with us. All right, so now the actual nuts and bolts of how we implement it, other than teaching it in class, I'm sure you're wondering, what do assessments look like? What kind of supplemental materials can I give my students to be able to get them over the hump of learning R? So what we did is we're developing some help pages on the internet that will supplement their lecture notes and augment them. I'm working on beefing them up each semester. And eventually there'll be like a tutorial where community members can come learn how to start in R as well. So I actually wrote the R help pages with an R script file and then used R Markdown in base R to render it as an HTML file to create our web pages. And that's pretty easy to do in RStudio. I'm not sure who asked that question earlier. I'm sure you know about the notebook capability, but you can still do it from base R. It's just not quite as clean. So I talked about those cases and projects. Our cases are typically like a quiz, and it's treated sort of like a take-home test. So they have ample lecture examples and homeworks that are meant to get them completely 100% prepared for this case. So this is a screenshot of my Canvas quiz, case 2, where I downloaded some Airbnb data from InsideAirbnb.com. And I just cleaned up the data a little bit and got rid of some commas and decimals and things like that, formatted it for them, and left them to do a little bit, but I let them download this subset on Hawaii Airbnb listings, and then I give them a starter R script so that they know exactly how to turn their code into me. So this is what the starter R script looks like. And I have a little video that I post for them to be able to use the starter script. I'm teaching online this semester, so it's a video, but normally I'd show it in class too. And what they do is they just paste their code to call in the data after that first line. R is going to ignore that first line as a comment, and they'll paste their code to get the answer to question 1 underneath the next line. So you want that code on a line that doesn't start with a hashtag, so that R will ignore the lines with the hashtag and run the code for the other. And so what they do is they answer these questions in the case. The first 2 questions are simple. Like the first one is about counting the rows in the data set. And the second one is recognizing that if there are spaces or special characters in the name of a column, if you open the CSV in Excel, it will put dots in place of the spaces in R. And so I just have them realize that. And then it kind of ramps up as we go through the questions. Here's 2 of the ones that are towards the end. Here they're calculating an average for review score ratings, where the host response time is within a few hours. That's a categorical variable, so they subset on that. And then the next one is the average price, that quantitative variable, where the property type is a treehouse and the neighborhood is North Kona. So again, that would be like filtering on 2 columns in Excel and then calculating the average of the remaining values. All right. And then they will turn in that code as the last question in this quiz. I leave a blank question. It's an essay question saying copy and paste their code. And then Canvas will auto grade these as numeric entries. And then we just go back and run their code and deduct points if need be. Most of our students make sure they're turning in the code that they actually did, but sometimes we unfortunately get code for another set of questions or something. So we check to make sure they actually did it in R, and then we let them have their grade. So that's how the cases look. They're in the spirit of a quiz. And then for projects, they'll do like a data visualization. So this is one student who went out of the way and learned how to graph average hospital charges in the US, where she graphed a map in R and then put a dot for the hospital system, plotted it, and then made the dot the size of the cost. So I was pretty proud of her for figuring this out. I helped her, of course. This is a project that we've assigned recently where it's just a scatter plot where they have to highlight a categorical variable and create a legend. And this is the code. This team really went all in and tried to really customize the point types and the font size. And so they really explored with R. I was pretty proud that they did all that. Another one a project where I assigned a data visualization. This is on beer, the head on a beer, in terms of adhesion and collapse according to 3 different bottling methods. So again, a legend, they have to label it, they can do subtitles, do margin text. And here's another one with side-by-side box plots. And then for exams, we use multiple choice questions. So I keep it simple on exams. I don't want them having to have a computer with them. Plus, if somebody freezes, you might not you know, they could get stuck and have a panic attack about R, and I just don't want to do that to them. We kind of test that they can actually calm down and use R in those case studies and projects. And then on the test, we try to make them all multiple choice. So this is one example of an R question that I asked on the first test, just knowing what the read.csv function does and what an object is in R. And like when I ask binomial probabilities, I don't ever change the arguments or anything tricky. They shouldn't have to memorize that. Here, they just need to know the difference between the d binom and the p binom function and what that first number should be. So if they've done all their homework, they should be able to answer this pretty easily. I don't have them memorize things I might Google, like which arguments are which. So things that we're changing in the near future, because obviously I changed the course in the second semester I was there, so I like to make changes constantly, but we're adding some topics from that are, you know, from the push for machine learning, like measuring out of sample performance and classification rates and things like that. And we want to work with the statistics department. They are trying to convince all their instructors and get them on board. We want them to introduce R in that first statistics course and incorporate R into more classes in the business school. And of course, I'm always improving the way that we teach R. And RStudio might come in one day because we get that question a lot. But that's all I have. So I think it is 3:25. So I'm here for questions if anyone has any.
Leslie, that was fantastic. Really, really detailed. And, you know, I loved seeing how you do it and, you know, the why behind it. There was that one question on the specific type of R that you use. I do not see any additional questions, but oh, there's chat. Hold on.
Okay.
I do not see any other questions.
Okay. Yeah, I feel, you know, I just now assume we're not doing any harm to the students by teaching them R, because it's become, I have so many stories of students who tell me somebody found out they knew R and it like got them an internship or it got them a job, or they ended up using it for a special project for their work. You know, even if someone's becomes like a manager and they're not actually in the analytics department, they're still going to need to interface with the analytics department. And so it just can't hurt to know.
It's fantastic. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leslie.